Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton and Tandreia Bellamy here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Hey, Tandreia, how you doing today?
I'm great. What unbelievable weather we're having.
Oh, I'm with you. I was out this morning
Isn't
trying
it
to water the
absolute?
grass. What's that?
I said unbelievable weather. It is
Oh,
just gorgeous outside.
it sure is. This time and early spring, two of my favorite times of the year here in Metro Atlanta. But
Yes.
great to have you here, Tandreia. And you know what's almost as beautiful as the weather is this conversation we got teed up here today, because we're going to be talking about practical, proven ways that organizations can optimize their ESG efforts. That's right, environmental, social, governments. We want to make sure everybody's with us in this conversation here today. Now, all of that, especially when it comes to procurement and supply chain management, right? We're going to be talking about what leading companies are doing to cultivate responsible supply chains and drive meaningful change in their operations. We're going to be offering up tools, strategies, actionable insights, because what good are other insights if they're not actionable? All of that so you can make a difference starting not tomorrow, but today. In fact, our guests are with an organization that have partnered with more than 85,000 businesses from across the world to create a much more socially and environmentally sustainable supply chain. So stay tuned for a great show. Tandreia, you buckled in, ready to go?
Oh, I am ready to learn.
You always are ready to go. So great to have you with us. And folks, great to have all of you with us. Two quick things before we get started. Let us know what you think. Share your comments throughout this very live session, just like Jara Prakash just did. Great to see you from the Tamil Nadu state in India. Great to have you here, Jara Prakash. And secondly, if you enjoy today's show, be sure to share it with a friend or your network. They'll be glad you did. Okay, Tandreia, let's welcome in our two distinguished guests here today, starting with Barbara Dirnberger, Principal Consultant with Sedex, and Irene Gari Chia, Consulting Solutions Manager with Sedex. Hey, Barbara, how you doing today?
Hello, I'm all good. Thank you. How about you?
Wonderful, wonderful. And Irene, how are you doing today?
I'm okay, thank you, Scott. How are you?
Great to see you. Great to see you. So we're excited. Tandreia and I are ready to go on this conversation. But we're going to start with a little fun warm-up question. And these might be, at least one of them will be very unique here today. I want to start, though, with the easier one with Irene. Irene, both of y'all call London home. And if you had any of our audience members are visiting London for the first time, what would be one place that you would recommend, or one thing you'd recommend they do?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I've been really giving this question a lot of thought. I'm not gonna say the typical Big Ben and Buckingham Palace, but I was thinking that a really great place to visit is Borough Market, where all the food there is locally sourced from British farmers, and it's the best place to try different British food that it doesn't consist on fish and chips. So really lovely market to visit.
Oh, I love that. Tandreia, as much as I love fish and chips, I bet there's a whole world of food exploration around London that we should also visit while we're there. Your thoughts, Tandreia?
Had the privilege of being in London in June, and it was great. It was amazing. I think I was close to one of those markets, but to go in and we think of our food courts and it's all flavors of American. It was so international. And it really gave you the opportunity to go up. A lot of the places had samples, so you could try different things before you actually bought them. And it was a mixture of foods and shopping, just phenomenal.
Oh, man, sign me up. I'm starving now. Thank you so much. And Amanda, behind the scenes, helping make production happen, says London is on her bucket list. So we'll see if we can't make that happen. All right. Now, I mentioned a second ago that the second fun warm-up question is going to be a bit more unique. And Barbara, in our prep conversations that we enjoyed, you shared, and we love all things outdoors here, especially animals. I'm a big bird nerd, but you shared something about this territorial fox that you've been trying to outwit here lately. You got to tell us more, Barbara.
Yes. When you asked me to come prepared with a light, entertaining story. I did struggle for a moment because I'm a human rights professional. So there is not too much lightheartedness in that.
Right.
But I remembered, and it does relate to London as well, I recently started gardening. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but I'm trying my best. And because it's fall, autumn now, I wanted to plant some bulbs, and I did. Like, I did it properly. I dug up the soil, I removed the weeds and the roots. I gave it a perfect surface all the way along the fence. The second I was done, and I was just standing indoors, watching out the window, like admiring my own work with a cup of tea, a fox shows up, and foxes are very common in London,
Okay.
and locks eyes, and starts weeing all over the area that I've prepared, like the whole few meters along the fence, whilst maintaining eye contact the whole time. So I do think that was personal.
Barbara, I knew it was going to be a good story, but that beat my expectations. So yeah, that fox declared an act of war, it sounds like, and knew what they were doing. Tandreia, did you run into any foxes when you were in London in June?
Thank goodness I did not.
Well, hey, let us know, Barbara, kidding aside, let us know. Gardening can be so therapeutic, but I've got no green thumb. So let us know if you have any tips as you continue your new hobby. All right. So we have got a great conversation. And as I think this is Amanda, that fox's garden now, Barbara. Indeed. All right. A lot of good stuff to get into here today. As all of our global community knows, we got smartest audience, all of global supply chain. We like always to start with some context, right? So Barbara, I'm going to continue with you. Tell us briefly about what Sedex does, as well as a little bit about your background.
Happy to. Sedex is, technically speaking, a technology provider that provides an array of solutions for their members and businesses beyond the membership to implement sustainable, improve the sustainability of their supply chain management. I said technically a technology firm because it is known for being a thought leader in the space of ethical trade and sustainability, having created very well-established auditing methodology called Sedex and many other tools. That's Sedex. I am a principal consultant at Sedex. I have 10 years or so experience working with businesses on human rights in particular, their exposure to social risks, and working with them on addressing those risks, mitigating them, and to a degree also remediating them in a way that works for their business model.
Barbara, outstanding, and what a noble mission you're on. And Tandreia, before we switch over to Irene, one of the great things about where we are right now and with global technology and just this golden age of supply chain technology is we're equipped with more information to do more about the human factor and to address, hopefully at root cause, more of the travesties that unfortunately we uncover across global supply chain. Any quick comment there, Tandreia?
I am so ready for this conversation to continue. And the research I was doing, watching one of the webinars, there's so many blind spots. And I just think this is going to be extremely educational for us today.
Well said, Tandreia, well said. And Barbara, appreciate you sharing a little more about you and a little more about the work Sedex does. So Irene, same question, similarly, tell us a little about your background.
Yeah, well, as you explained, I'm a consulting solutions manager in the Sedex consulting team. So I mainly specialize in advancing human rights and sustainable procurement practices for companies, especially in the fashion and manufacturing sector. So my work mainly involves scoping projects and proposals, making sure that client needs are being met, and that we're providing them with a tailored solutions that can actually enhance their supply chain transparency and accountability. And my international relations and social policy background really helps to inform the approach that I take on these issues.
I'm sure. And of course, you mentioned one of my favorite sectors, manufacturing. Spent a big chunk of my career in or serving the manufacturing industry, and it's one of our favorites for sure. Okay, so Tandreia, Irene, and Barbara. And by the way, we welcome in Jaya Prakash earlier from India. Tim is also tuned in and watching. Tim, let us know where you're tuned in from. Great to have you here. And let us know what you think as we work our way through today's conversation. So, Irene, quick follow-up question to you. Because y'all's organization hosted a bunch of business leaders, probably from around the world, at a recent conference entitled Explore Sustainability North America. What was a key takeaway or two from all those discussions?
Yeah, it was really great. Just to provide some context, as you said, Explore Sustainability is an event mainly aimed for our US members so they can get together and share insights and discuss challenges across different industries. So we really received a positive feedback on that. One of the main discussions and takeaways that happened in the conversation and in the event was the focus on best practices for engaging suppliers. That really means it can go from industry collaboration to building trust with suppliers. So it was a lot of emphasis on that supplier engagement part. So that was really great. And what's great about Explore is that it really brings together different industries to discuss similar issues.
Irene, I wish I had been there. I love Tandreia, one of my favorite topics, and one of the huge opportunities that we have out there is engaging our suppliers and the whole ecosystem in a whole new way, especially with the T word that Irene talked about, which is building real trust. That's how we can move mountains, we serve the customers better, drive innovation, and do some of the things we're going to be talking about here today. Change how business is done. Your quick response there, Tandreia.
Again, getting people together and domestically was great, but being able to also exchange these ideas globally, because so many of the companies are global now. And if you don't have an understanding of that social context, there could be some major missteps that could cost a business mightily, either in real dollars, reputation loss, or a loss of business.
Yeah, good stuff, Tandreia. All right. So, and by the way, speaking of that event, Ryan says it was an outstanding event. Sedex Explore Sustainability has been a great event for 3 years in a row now. How about that? Tim says he's tuned in from the San Francisco Bay Area, but that's gorgeous. And we also have Samir from London as well. Samir, I'm curious to know if you've run across any territorial foxes, but great to have you here, Samir. All right. So our topic today, sharing resources far beyond just social compliance. So we're going to start with the why. Barbara, why is it critical that business leaders and their teams move well past compliance alone?
Well, the simple answer is that social matters are not a tick box exercise. That's not how they will be understood or addressed. Now, compliance is an important element of businesses' engagement with their own social impact and the social impact of their sourcing and supply chains. But ultimately, it is about human experiences. It is about creating decent jobs, both at home, wherever you're based, and abroad in your supply chains. And it is about having business practices that benefit local communities. It can be a competitive advantage.
Okay.
We used to and it can create brand loyalty. It can having measures beyond compliance and using the social impact of your enterprise as an active part of how you want to position yourself in the market can be a great thing, but it also is an essential thing to mitigate risk. Now, in this space, we used to talk about reputational risk a lot. These days, the expectations are really changing. It's not about preventing that one instance where maybe an issue comes out that companies didn't know was there in the first place. Nowadays, the conversation is much more about acknowledging that every business that operates globally has a certain exposure to social risks. Mm-hmm. And will have their ways of working, their operations, their procurement, their sourcing practices, all of that will have an impact on people. And ultimately, it's not about having a compliance team sitting somewhere with often fairly limited resources to just check boxes and make sure that a company is in line with legislation. That, as Tandreia, I don't know if she said it within the stream or just before, she pointed out that it's very complex legislation that people are often dealing with because it's international, it's global.
Right.
It's not about ticking the boxes to meet those requirements. It is actually much easier to look at the actual impacts of your business operations and ways of working, and to integrate ways of addressing that into your broader business operations, so across functions.
Oh, Barbara, man, we're getting out of the gate with some good stuff. So before I share a couple of my thoughts around what you just shared, as well as get some of Tandreia's, folks, we have got Irene tuned in from a big conference on the road, and sometimes technology lets us down. We've all experienced that. So we're working to get Irene back. So stay tuned. But going back to what Barbara said, Tandreia, I love her emphasis on the human experience, the need to create good jobs, right? That how that can roll up into real competitive advantage, right? Add to brand loyalty initiatives and consumer and customer experience, as well as the need to change the conversations that we're having. Tandreia, what'd you hear there?
You know, I think one of the other parts of that is there is a fight on now to get the best, most innovative employees, to have the best people come on board and want to stay with your organization. So not only are you going to create customer loyalty, consumer loyalty, but being able to stay competitive for the top talent, I think is another outcome of doing this the right way.
Excellent point, Tandreia. Excellent point. And we're getting a little bit of feedback as we reconnect things. We may need to mute some mics to make sure we're all good to go. So stay tuned, stay with us as we fight through good old Murphy's Law. He's as pesky as that fox, Barbara. Okay, so let's stick with you, Barbara. I got a couple follow-up questions of what you already shared. I want to start with, you referenced at least one common misconception about social compliance in your previous response. Any other common misconceptions you want to call out?
There are two main ones. The first one is the one I already spoke to briefly, which is the presumption that it is all about documentation and providing the right documentation to the right people at the right time. That is the first misconception. The other misconception is that idea that social issues and social risks to both the people and the companies are something far down the supply chain, are something far away in another country. That is frankly not true. It's
Yes.
It affects supply chains up and down. It affects operations. To approach it as a problem in other countries is almost patronizing and not realistic. Anyone who works globally will have made that experience. That the issues actually translate throughout supply chains. Often it is purchasing practices that very much contribute to social matters being not managed as well as they could be. Simple example would be pricing. Of course, if I'm working in procurement, I do have certain targets and I do want to get the highest possible quality for the lowest possible price. Now, in those systems, in those procurement practices, if there is no space for social consideration and addressing the knock-on effect of those practices down the road, then there will be implications for others. But also looking at things that are much closer to home. For instance, in the UK, their forced labor is a widely acknowledged issue. There is a disclosure requirement where larger companies have to write a modern slavery statement. That is because it is well acknowledged that social issues related to business, including severe issues like forced labor, are happening in all countries. There is no, even if we sometimes talk about low risk sourcing countries or operation countries, it doesn't mean that there's no risk. It still means that there might be very severe risk. Another example would be not that long ago, there was child labor found in the US. Now, for people who work in the field we are working in, that actually wasn't quite as shocking or surprising as it felt for the world, because it's very clear that in the US, just to take one example, there is a really high level of inequality. There are fairly deprived communities with very limited access to public services, including education. That is the recipe for child labor. Whether you're based in India or the US, it doesn't matter. Vulnerabilities are noticeable around the globe, and companies in their day-to-day work are exposed to those vulnerabilities and may, through them, have impacts that are unintended.
Well said, Barbara, on so many different levels. I want to call out two, and then Tandreia, get your thoughts here. I love the emphasis towards the first half of our response around let's not treat it like Fantasia from the never-ending story. This is in our own markets, our communities, our own cities, and that's how we should approach it. And then to the last point she made, we've had our dear friend Tim Nelson with Hope for Justice join us time and time again. And one of my favorite things he shared that kind of Barbara spoke to, a lot of folks, we're not surprised across industry when we find it, but the biggest question is what we do about it once we know about it. Tandreia, what'd you hear there in terms of some of those common misconceptions?
I think one of the things that just really, really resonated was the inequalities from an education standpoint, which creates systemic underperformance for life for people. And knowing that there is a problem and actually doing something about it is a big difference. So here with what they're doing and making sure it's not a checklist can provide some really impactful solutions moving forward.
Excellent point, Tandreia. Yeah, we all want to avoid just pencil whipping that checklist. We need meaningful change for our team members, our communities, our organizations, and everyone. Folks across the ecosystem for sure. All right, so Barbara, a couple more follow-up questions. Companies, you kind of we've touched on this a couple times already when it comes to assessing the social impact of company supply chains. What's a couple of ways that you have established that leading companies are doing just that?
One first step companies usually are taking is understanding what the impact is, what the impact of their business model is, of their ways of working. There is a vast variety of ways to do that. So on the one hand, you have very extensive pieces of work like human rights impact assessments, which is when you're asking usually a third party to be on the ground and really understand what the social impacts are all around to any stakeholder who might be involved, and particularly to those where they might be vulnerable to exploitation. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a desk-based research to understand the core risks you are exposed to. So it is a really wide spectrum, and it depends on what the business is, where they are at on their journey to sustainable sourcing, and on their journey to advancing human rights, or at least not harming them in their ways of working. For all of them, it is relevant and true that it is important to understand the current business practices, and that is not on isolated initiatives around have we built a school somewhere. It is at the core of the business, including where you buy from. What consequences does that have? It is for all of them true that there should be an element that is across departments. So it's not an add-on thing to look at that just creates an additional burden. It's very much integrated in actual ways of working. And I think for businesses, it is important to boil it down to that human level where it makes sense, where people can apply their own common sense, and to enable ways of working that are responsible and that create awareness as well.
Well said, Barbara. And Tandreia, one of the things, kind of rolling up all of what Barbara just shared there, one of the things I think is really important is we were talking about those checklists earlier. I think when it comes to assessing things, that organizations and business leaders, it's important not to make assumptions, not to pencil whip, but put a real robust process in place that truly gets a full holistic assessment that doesn't have blinders on, decision makers, and doesn't just keeps it real with what the findings really are. Tandreia, your thoughts when it comes to assessing that social impact of supply chains?
Actually, I would like to ask another question, just because, again, I'm just want to learn. And so as you're going and you've worked with some major organizations, who does your message resonate with the most? And what have you seen that's been very effective for getting organizations to change the way they do things?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's incredibly relevant. There are many different approaches to how to advance the social impacts and human rights within businesses. I think there is one core barrier that sometimes for these days smaller businesses who have not yet done too much in the space needs addressing first, and that is around, well, what is the business's responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Why is it the business when we're talking about human rights? And human rights a question of states making sure that citizens have rights, and that is absolutely accurate. But there's also that history of the field I'm working in where in the course of globalization, businesses started operating internationally, and what happened to emerge at the back of that is something we call the race to the bottom, where nation states started to underbid each other on labor standards as to attract international business. And businesses more or less are relying on those things. Much of what we buy for the price we buy it is based on the idea that we have cheaper workforces available to ourselves. Now, the idea there was that there is that also gives back to those local communities and enhances local development. That is sustainable growth within their regions, as well as with the brand that sources from other places. Now, there were mechanisms established themselves very early on that undermine that. And the business's responsibility really comes in when you can see direct links between ways of working and the social impact. I think I said it before, the business activities have social impact, and it is about creating an awareness of what that is, and then taking the courage to actually influence that and make informed decisions rather than leaving it up to coincidence. There are a few examples of companies who are leading in that space. One that I always like mentioning is Tony Chocolonely. They really have that as part of their brand. For them, for anyone who may not know them, they're a sustainable
Candy, right? Yeah, it's delicious chocolate. Okay.
Exactly. Now, chocolate is a commodity widely traded that comes with certain social risks. There is child labor in supply chains. There is high reliance on small-scale smallholder farming that comes with its own bucket of issues. Can be a great tool to allow communities access to funds, to development, but can also easily become an exploitative tool where markets are competing against each other. So what Tony does is they are very open about the risks and the issues within their supply chains. They honestly communicate that they probably are looking at child labor unless they do something about it. So they really moved the needle from, well, everything is fine until we hear otherwise, to actually we know that something is wrong. We need to address it head on, and we need to be transparent about it. So we don't create this echo chamber that businesses tend to be in sometimes, where businesses keep reassuring each other that everything is fine until anyone says otherwise.
Right.
We are now, we've entered an era when it comes to social impacts of businesses that follows a very different tone. It's all about see it, name it as what it is. And it's not an individual's business to solve the world's problem, but everyone has a part to play.
So, Barbara, if I can jump in, because we're gonna tackle some of the things that our audience members and organizations out there can do. I think this first half of the conversations already has been very actionable. It's a good question earlier as well, Tandrea. I want to call something out the chocolate industry. I was just talking about this with my dear friend Mike Griswold from Gartner. We were talking about some of the many challenges the chocolate industry has beyond some that you call out, Barbara, that we're going to have to solve as a globe, and especially as people around the world love great, delicious chocolate. Irene, are you a big fan of chocolate as much as we are?
Yeah, love it.
Every day, all day, right? Every day, all day. Well, I look forward to. I've got one more question for Barbara, and then we're going to hear from Irene on some of the things that we need to do starting as early as today. And I want to do this. So one more question around kind of level setting, Barbara. You're working with all the different companies out there, 85,000. Man, you're like a fountain of knowledge, I think, for these conversations and many others. What other emerging trends do you see in social procurement practices, and how do you see some of those evolving in the next few years?
The first one is it's a part of a larger conversation around sustainability, rather than environmental impacts and social impacts being treated as completely differently, as two completely unrelated things. They are not unrelated. Environmental implications have an impact on people.
Yep.
And vice versa. If we are looking to address environmental issues, it is core to also be aware of social implications within that. So that is the first one, that it's all under the umbrella of sustainability, allowing for a much larger conversation across industries as well. So it's not just manufacturing, it's not just retail. Things like financial services start to be part of conversations.
Yeah, every sector
is definitely are. Yeah.
Every sector is being impacted. I got you.
Exactly. The other thing we're seeing is increasing regulation. Around the globe, there are more and more laws rolling in very quickly. Initially, those were reporting and disclosure legislation. So it was all about write up, look at what you're doing, write it up, make it public. That seems to still be an enormous driver, as those are the first kind of set of legislation on transnational business activities that were established. But we now also have very effective legislation on due diligence requirements and on imports being rolled out. So it starts to have real consequences and financial fines associated with doing or not doing the due diligence on your social impacts.
That's right.
We see a trickle-down effect of that, where even if the legislation, for instance, the due diligence legislation, biggest driver at the moment is EU legislation, but because so many businesses work globally, internationally, they're looking at implementing one process and one only. So it does indirectly affect companies in other regions as well. And looking at the sum of legislation coming through, we just see that we're entering an era where the transnational business operations and the impacts on social and environment start to be a core and a normal core of businesses' considerations. So the way that I see it, and that I see it playing out in the long run, is that piece of about integration of social considerations into all the daily business practices will become much stronger. A decade down the line, I think it will be completely normal for someone who is doing procurement day in, day out to consider the social elements of their decision making, rather than having one team isolated that is labeled sustainability but doesn't always link as well with the rest of the company as it should.
Barbara, excellent response. And Tandreia, I'm gonna get your thoughts here, but a couple of things I heard. Every sector, no one is immune. No one is immune. And if you think you are, you need to wake up and get your new cup of coffee. Secondly, regulation, of course, that is an ever evolving. And as Barbara mentioned, the bark is coming with more and more bite these days when it comes to companies that run afoul of the regulations internationally. And then thirdly, and perhaps my favorite part of your response, Barbara, is how Innovative, forward-looking leaders are baking in the need to do better as part of the culture, where it permeates what the team members do every day. It's not a different department. It's not a different project. It is part of what we do day in and day out. Tandreia, what'd you hear there from some of these trends and how they're evolving?
The thing that stands out is as we have most businesses now that are going global, most businesses are selling across borders. Most businesses are interconnecting and marketing, and they're going to have to be aware of what's happening. And so much of this legislation, I mean, it's a thought and it doesn't get enacted to 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And if you're not planning for that along the way, it could really, really hurt you. So in this case, he can't plead ignorance to the law.
That's right.
And having a partner like this could be hugely beneficial.
Excellent point, Tandreia. Folks, we've got to wake up. We got to wake up as an industry. Many companies have. And in some of those cases, they're shining a big light as they're blazing the path, which should be a model for many, many others, organizations and leaders to follow. So, Irene, so we got you back. We've established our mutual love of chocolate, but we're also, more importantly, we're establishing some actions and proven best practices that supply chain leaders in particular can take to take those ESG initiatives to an entirely new level, to bake it into the culture as we were talking about earlier. You've got 3 thoughts there. Irene, walk us through that if you would.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so the first one, drawing from what Barbara said earlier, would be to understand and assess your risks. So the most important thing to do in order to understand your risks is to use a tool that can allow you to create a comprehensive risk profile for each supplier. So any risk assessment tool, in this case at Sedex, we have Radar, which is our Sedex inherent risk assessment tool, and it collects data on various risk factors related to ethical sourcing. So you're able to see which region, which countries and which industries and sectors are higher risk and in which type of risks. So that allows you to actually understand what you need to look at in each industry and in each sector.
Yep.
And in order to assess them, you can take one step further. So you can actually do on-the-ground investigation. So go there by yourself, speak to your suppliers, visit the factories that the employees are in, visit the living quarters of those employees, etc. So you can actually see those risks live and see how you can mitigate them. On the second one, it would what you can do after you've understand and assess those risks, you can do the verification part. And with this verification, you can do that at the same time is adopting proactive measures. So with the verification, what you can do is to actually conduct the audits. You can use third-party audits to that, or and then you can also adopt proactive measures such as training your suppliers. You can do capacity building for your suppliers and also for your employees. You can also put grievance mechanism in place, make sure they work. And finally, the last one, and kind of one of the most important one, would be to avoid overburdening suppliers. So
Yes,
as we all know, your suppliers don't only work with yourself as a company, but they work with many different companies that have many different commitments. So different strategies that we can do, for instance, one would be industry collaboration. So collaborate with other companies from the same industry. You can standardize practices, you can share knowledges and resources in order to take off that burden of your suppliers. And you can also use data sharing platforms such as like what we have with Sedex, that your suppliers can share their audits with different companies all at once, so they don't have to perform different audits for different companies.
Irene, that deserves its own show, those 3 things. There's so many different elements to talk about. I appreciate you sharing. Tandreia, a couple things there. I liked what Irene talked about. Thankfully, now that we're past the global pandemic, goodness gracious, getting out and meeting our suppliers, breaking bread, getting into their sites, meeting their people, meeting the folks on the front line, getting past just the managers. I love that. And we don't do enough of that. And then thirdly, and when I heard her talk about avoid overburdening suppliers, it took me back painfully to a chapter in my journey working for a manufacturing organization that supplied to a automotive OEM. Oh, goodness. Boy, we get overburdened with all sorts of things to make life tough during stretches. And, that's in my mind, avoiding that, not avoiding the frank conversations and getting things right, all that stuff, but changing the nature of the relationships, baking in more trust. All that is part of this process to make sure suppliers are communicated well, given the information they need with where the ecosystem is going, and putting them in a position to act in a way that doesn't overwhelm their people, their operation, you name it. But Tandreia, that's a lot. Those 3 things that Irene shared there. A lot of actionable thoughts. Your thoughts, Tandreia?
I really, it took me back to the pandemic and the shortage we had of chips and the impact that it had on so many different industries, especially automotive, that there was such this huge chip shortage. If there had been more collaboration within industry, we would have had less suppliers that were overburdened, and we wouldn't have went through some of the hardships that we went through. So in this case, collaboration would not have hurt the competitiveness at all. It would have allowed everybody to do better as we went through that huge shortage.
Excellent point, Tandreia. And we may be headed there again with the high-powered AI chips. We'll see. We'll keep our finger on the pulse of that. But one last thought about what Irene shared there is planning and communicating all of where we're going to across the ecosystem. It sounds so simple and basic, but it's a step that gets missed time and time again. Okay. So I want to, Barbara, as we're kind of starting to come down the home stretch here, Irene just shared some practical tips. I want to ask you, when it comes to an action that you suggest our audience take today, right? Not tomorrow, not next week, today, what would that be?
Have an honest look at your impacts across supply chains. So if you find that there are social issues, that doesn't mean that you have done something wrong. It means that you finally have created visibility and are at the starting point to address it. It's the one first thing to do is have an actual honest look.
I love that, Barbara. And if you're finding new things, right, as hopefully you are, it means you're doing it the right way, and you're not pencil whipping that list of things and making assumptions from what previous years assessments may have determined. And as I think all of us here have talked about, it's not when you find it or what you find, it's what you do with it, right? Okay, so I want a quick follow-up question, especially about Sedex. There's a number of ways. I've been diving into y'all's case studies, which I found really interesting. A lot of those case studies, I think, are models in forward-looking leadership. And so I've got more reading to do, but beyond the case studies, there's all kinds of other things related to the work you are doing on the Sedex website. But I want to ask you, Barbara, from your platform to the SMETA audits, I think I said that right, SMETA, SMETA audits, consulting, of course, training, a whole bunch more. But how easy is it to get started partnering with you and the team?
Partnering with us is easy to initiate. It's just a reach out. Always happy to help, no matter where you're at on your sustainability journey. If the question was how easy is it to start having a positive social impact?
Yes.
I would love to be able to say that's really easy, but that would be a lie. It is a very complex subject. For those that are further along on their journey, verify, measure, evaluate if what you're doing is working, and keep at it, keep that circle alive. For those who are earlier on, it's about identify your risks, identify the risks you're exposed to. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging risk. It's the right thing to do. When it comes to across the board, it's about fostering a culture of responsibility and awareness. That is a good starting point. It's about starting somewhere. You don't have to have the perfect plan before starting somewhere. It's about taking the first steps and seeing what happens, taking the feedback or the learnings from that on board. and connect with your peers, with other people, with others across the industry associations, with experts. We are around. There is a whole industry about social matters in business. There's a whole industry about the broader sustainability considerations, an industry filled with really amazing experts that I learn from day in, day out. Some of them are at Sedex. The industry is wider than that. Expertise is out there. Do connect, do reach out to the experts and get that feedback and input.
Love it. Get the help you need, whether it's at Sedex or elsewhere, is what I heard Barbara said. Also, Tandreia, and I like we need more frank candor and honesty across industry in these conversations. What I heard there is it's easy for folks to get started with Sedex, no matter where you are in your journey. If you're just starting out, that's fine. You can work with Barbara and Irene and the whole team. Or if you're advanced, there's resources and outcomes for you there. But it's not easy to drive impact and outcomes and drive change. It isn't easy. And that's where this opportunity comes, because a lot of times, Tandreia, we don't have the talent and the resources or the sheer bandwidth inside the proverbial four walls to drive the change we need and get the outcomes that our ecosystem, our suppliers, our customers, our team members, our stakeholders, our shareholders are demanding. Tandreia, what'd you hear there in Barbara's response?
That it's not easy. And I think the fact that it's not easy is one of the things that should allow people to be a little more creative, allow people to partner with others, allow people to raise their hand and say, I don't know what I don't know. So let's start learning. I love the fact that there's an educational component on the website. There's a lot of information out there that just really opens your eyes. And I think people need to start, because this isn't going to be one that you can turn your head or stick your head in the sand and say, I didn't know, especially with some of the global legislation that's out there. You're going to be responsible for knowing. So get started now.
That's right. Excellent points there, Tandreia, because the challenge is only going to grow for sure. Irene, okay, we want to make sure, folks, y'all offer a wealth of expertise and experiences and tools, resources, you name it. We're going to make sure folks have the website in a second. But how can folks track you down, Irene, and engage and probably tee up that first conversation with you?
Yeah. So there are two teams you can reach out to. So if you want to speak to Barbara and I, you can reach us in our consulting inbox. So that's consulting@sedex.com. And we'll be able to have a chat with you. We can ask any questions that you want. We can have further conversation, or we can go into more detail on what we have discussed today. And if you're more interested to learn more about the Sedex community, the products we offer, how to engage with us in a more membership level, you can contact new.business@sedex.com, and one of our colleagues will be able to help as well. And just to say that we have a webinar coming up on the 12th of November at 3 p.m. GMT time, and it will be about assessing ESG performance for service providers, as we have released a service provider self-assessment questionnaire. So that will be it. You can catch us there.
Outstanding. And I bet that's on the website. We can find that on the website, Irene. Is that right?
Correct.
So folks, check out the website here. We got it in the private chat. You're one click away, or the chat, the live stream chat. You're going to find all sorts of resources that we've touched on: blogs, events, case studies, white papers, the webinar event that Irene talked about, ways to engage with the team. It's so important you take that first step. So good stuff there. Y'all check out sedex.com. All right. So Tandreia, we have covered a lot of ground. I got to give one more shout out before I get your patented key takeaway. Greg, great to have you back from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Let us know what you thought about today's conversation. Enjoyed your perspective on a show earlier this week. All right. So Tandreia, I think we've had a very practical, actionable, real conversation with Barbara and Irene, who are, they're not just talking about it, they're making action and results happen out there across the globe. But if you had to point just to one for your patented key takeaway, Tandreia, what would that be?
Get started. get educated. It's a topic that isn't discussed a lot. When you talk about sustainability, we all think about reverse logistics, but this is something that is serious and, as Barbara said, not easy to implement, but you got to start somewhere.
That's right. That is right. We got to lean in. Just because it's not easy doesn't mean we shy away and go do all the other easy things. It's part of the nature of what we do as leaders. We lean into those tough conversations, the tough challenges, the issues of our time. And what makes that easier when you don't have all the answers that we were talking about, all of us have acknowledged, is you lean on experts that have been there and done that and still are, to find a better path forward. Not an easy path forward, but a better and at least an easier one. So well said there, Tandreia. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone that showed out. Well, hold on a second. I want to add in one more thing here from Greg. I love talking about, and Greg's talking about, tearing down those silos. You got to start the communication from within and break down those silos. I'm with you, Greg. It's one of the things, what's old is new again. Silos have been around since the beginning of business, and they still are, despite the fact that we all know it hinders so much. So go silo busting, folks. Big thanks. So I know we couldn't hit everybody's comment and question here today. The good news is you got Barbara and Irene ready to have a conversation post-event, share a cup of coffee, decaf coffee maybe, Barbara. Y'all can even share gardening stories or London best practices, or talk about the need to change business as it exists today, which we've been talking about throughout the last hour. So big thanks to Barbara Dirnberger, Principal Consultant with Sedex. Barbara, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You bet. And Irene Gari Chia, Consulting Solutions Manager with Sedex. Irene, thanks so much for fighting and winning Murphy's Law and the tech challenges that we all have every day of our lives. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Scott.
And Tandreia, always a pleasure. Tandreia Bellamy. Folks, if you're not connected, following her across social, especially on LinkedIn, you're missing out. Tandreia, always a pleasure to knock out these conversations with you.
Absolutely, Scott. Thanks for inviting me on.
That's right. Next time. Looking forward to it already. Folks, connect with Barbara and Irene. Reach out. Make sure you visit sedex.com so you can take action on what we're talking about here today. Deeds, not words, as y'all have heard me say 1 or maybe 10 million times. That's what it's about. So there's your homework, folks. Take one thing from the conversation, put it in action, right? Talk with your teams today. Take action today, as Barbara was talking about earlier. But whatever you do, on behalf of the entire Supply Chain Now team, Scott Luton challenging you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.